Hello, I'm AJ Camacho with WRG News' PINDROP. Mr. Paul Givan was the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, a post he held between 2021 and February of this year, 2022. He is a member of the Democratic Unionist Party, or the DUP, in Northern Ireland, and he joins me now. Mr. Givan, thank you very much for joining us today. If it's all right with you, I'd like to get started with sort of a quick fire round of sort of how do you feel questions about some of the issues facing Northern Ireland. Is that all right?
Yes, and a pleasure to be with you, AJ.
Thank you very much, Mr. Givan. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Starting with the first question, how do you feel about this new proposal for red lanes and green lanes for customs in Northern Ireland, this proposed change to the protocol?
I see it as progress because both the United Kingdom government and the European Union now recognise that what had been put in place was totally disproportionate and was creating unnecessary checks. And because over 90% of all of the goods that travel between Great Britain and Northern Ireland and cross the Irish Sea stay in Northern Ireland. And so from the European Union's perspective, the risk to their single market being contaminated, so to speak, from goods traveling within the United Kingdom is negligible. And therefore, you need to have a much more proportionate system in place than what had been agreed to previously by the UK and the European Union government. So I see it as progress. We're still wanting to see precisely the detail of what such a proposal would look like. My party is very clear that goods traveling within the United Kingdom should not be subject to any checks. They are produced in the UK, consumed in the UK, and they should not be subject to any checks. If there are goods that are onward traveling to the European Union out of the United Kingdom from Northern Ireland into the Republic of Ireland or elsewhere in Europe, well then yes, I can understand why there needs to be some system in place. But again, where that should take place and how you should go about that is a matter now that's being negotiated by the two teams, by the UK and the European Union.
All right. Next, a quick fire question. How do you feel about Sinn Féin now being the largest party in Northern Ireland, although not a majority still, but a plurality, larger than the DUP?
Well, it was largely as a result of a division within the wider unionist community. Sinn Féin didn't gain any extra seats in the last elections, but unionism lost seats, and that was as a result of a divided vote. And where you have a multiplicity of parties and candidates trying to go after the same type of voter, that is what happened in that case. That's the result of a democratic election. Sinn Féin have been on a very significant journey from the days of the IRA campaign to now pursuing exclusively peaceful means and supporting the police and the rule of law. So it's progress that they're very much engaged in that democratic process. But in terms of the outcome of the election, of course, I didn't want Sinn Féin to win the election. They pursue a political ideology, both in terms of their Marxist, socialist perspective on the economy and wider society, but also when it comes to the reunification of Ireland, and their pursuit of that agenda is contrary to my perspective, where I believe we are stronger within the fourth largest economy in the world, being part of the United Kingdom. And so, purely down to the politics of it, I would much rather that my party had won that election. But as elections ebb and flow, there'll be another election will come forward in due course, and we'll put our case. And I believe there are still the votes in Northern Ireland for the DUP to once again emerge as the largest party.
All right. And last question in this sort of quick fire round. Do you feel better with Liz Truss as Prime Minister in the United Kingdom relative to Boris Johnson?
Well, given the turmoil that Liz Truss has been in the past week, it does cause me a lot of concern about the instability within the politics in London. That's not good for anybody. Set aside somebody's party political perspective on this. If the Prime Minister is not doing well, we all suffer, and the instability that is creating I would be concerned would have a ripple effect on the negotiations, even between the European Union and resolving the protocol issue to allow the Northern Ireland institutions to get back up and running. What she had said during her leadership campaign and in terms of dealing with Northern Ireland was a better position that she held from my perspective than Boris Johnson. But unfortunately, the unionist community in Northern Ireland has often learned to our detriment that there are very few English politicians who will stand with Northern Ireland. There are some, and we're very grateful for that. But at times, successive prime ministers have used Northern Ireland, but then not stood by us. And Boris Johnson was an example of that. And I hope Liz Truss is able to see through the commitments that she made to help resolve the issues in Northern Ireland and allow us to make progress. But the political instability within the Conservative Party, I fear, has a corrosive effect on the wider policies that they're trying to pursue.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Givan, for answers to those initial questions. I want to now go into some that we can maybe go into more depth with. First one, whenever we talk about Northern Ireland, I feel like there's always this thing hanging overhead of the threat of a potential return to violence. What a lot of people have said is a really good solution to prevent that in the long term is integrated education. A poll last year found that Lucid Talks found that 71% of Northern Irish people support integrated education as being the main model for schools. And yet, only about 8% of students and about 8% of schools are actually integrated in Northern Ireland. Why haven't we seen more change, more progress in desegregating schools in Northern Ireland?
Well, I would be much more confident in terms of any prospect of returning to violence. I think is absolutely remote. I don't see that on the radar whatsoever. Nor do I think the education system that we have or don't have is in any shape or form a contributory factor to what happened during that 30 years of terrorist conflict. Northern Ireland society is naturally and organically becoming more integrated. I see that in my own constituency when it comes to new housing developments and a more mixed integrated intake of people that are buying houses. And that then has a downstream effect when it comes to where children will go to their schools. It is very much a reflection of where population bases exist, and the schools are located on those population bases, that they naturally are going to take in the community where they're located in. And you can't force integration. You're not going to say to children in one community, right, this school has got 100% Catholic population. We need to get Protestants coming to that school. So we're going to stop the local Catholic community from getting access to the school, and we're going to bus in Protestant children from 10 miles away. That's not going to happen. But what you will have over time is communities becoming more integrated, and then that reflects the schools. And I see that in my own constituency, where the schools are becoming more integrated through that natural form of integration. I don't see how forced integration will work. And to the same point on this issue around education, we do believe in parental choice. We do believe that a fundamental basic human right for any parents is to send the children to a school of their choice. And if that's a faith-based school, then that's a faith-based school. If it's an integrated school, then so it should be an integrated school. So you do need to, I think, in a pluralist, truly liberal society, have a plurality of offering in our public services. And so this pursuit of a single form of education, I don't think is something that is a progressive part of a democratic society.
I want to turn now towards something that's very imminently facing Northern Ireland, and that is by October 28th, if there is not a power sharing agreement, as I understand it, there will be new elections called. That's next Friday, so about a week from when this interview airs. What do you think are the odds that we see a power sharing agreement by then? And if there is no power sharing agreement and new elections do need to be called, which party do you think that's going to benefit in the next elections?
Well, it's a legal duty for the Secretary of State to call an election if after 6 months from the last election, there hasn't been a new executive formed. And so that's stating the obvious by way of the law. And if an election is then called by the Secretary of State, then I think we undoubtedly will be fighting this election like never before. I would envisage that election to be almost nearly a rerun on the Brexit referendum, because it'll be very much based upon Northern Ireland's relationship within the United Kingdom and the European Union Republic of Ireland. So it almost becomes a constitutional type of election. And in those elections, I think people will seek to support those that will provide the strongest and loudest voices for their particular identity. I would be confident that the DUP would do well in that election. I think we would increase our votes, and what would then happen on terms of where Sinn Féin would be. I think that's a harder one to call, because they did do very well in the last election. Is there any more room left for them to grow their electoral base? I think that will remain to be seen. And I think you could see some of those other parties like the Alliance, the softer Nationalist Party and the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party being squeezed, and also the TUV, which got 60,000 votes but didn't gain any extra seats. I would see a number of their voters coming towards the DUP. So it would be a more polarizing form of election.
You say them coming towards the DUP, but if in this hypothetical scenario, don't you think voters might hold the DUP accountable for the fact that they have to vote again and that they didn't have this chance for an election? I see this as potentially hurting the DUP.
Well, I don't, and I'll tell you why. Because we want the Stormont institutions to be up and running, and our community very much see how the Northern Ireland Protocol damages our constitutional position within the United Kingdom. And for a unionist voter, they see that constitutional question as extremely important, because from that flows the economic support for our public services. So funding for health, funding for schools, funding for investment into job opportunities, all flows as a part of our relationship within the United Kingdom. And so whenever we are unable to be fully part of an integrated United Kingdom, it has a detrimental impact, not just on our identity as a people, but also the very financial and economic well-being of society. And so we have been flexible, but there has been an intransigence from the European Union. And I think our people will recognize that. That's certainly the indications that I have. Yes, our voters want us to be in Stormont. They want us to be doing the day and daily job of those bread and butter issues. But they also see the much bigger macro environment, which is contaminating our local politics. And once we can deal with those macro issues, then that unlocks the potential to really take a big step forward at a local level.
I want to turn right now in these last couple of minutes we have to this question of the fate of Northern Ireland remaining in the United Kingdom, or potentially rejoining with the Republic of Ireland. Michelle O'Neill has now promised, she's extended her sort of deadline for this to 2032, when she expects to have a referendum on potentially rejoining Northern Ireland. Do you support the idea of having a referendum on unity within that time frame, sometime in the next 10 years?
Well, there isn't the evidential basis to justify having a poll. And whenever people are looking for stability, the last thing Northern Ireland needs is a poll on the big constitutional question, which has divided our community for so many years. And when you look at the election results over the past 20 years to the Northern Ireland Parliament, the Nationalist Republican vote hasn't increased. It peaked back in 1998. And it hasn't reached that level. What you have seen is a growth in the Alliance Party and those who don't identify as either British or Irish. and a growing number of people who identify themselves as Northern Irish. And I would regard myself as being Northern Irish and British, where I very much want Northern Ireland to work. We share the same part of the world. The issues affecting my community affect the Republican nationalist community, and we have to make this country work. And we should do that by, yes, within the United Kingdom, but also by having good relations with our European Union partners and our neighbouring country in the Republic of Ireland. So I don't see the evidence there electorally for a border poll to be called. And I think it would be destabilizing at a time whenever we need greater stability. But unionists, from my perspective, cannot be complacent, because we have to demonstrate to the wider population the benefits of being part of the United Kingdom, and not just take it for granted that people will vote that way. And it needs to transcend the religious communities in Northern Ireland. It can't just be solely the preserve of the kind of Protestant community that we're going to retain our position within the United Kingdom. But there are quite a number of Catholic people who recognise that being part of the United Kingdom is economically the best place for us to be in. But we don't see that translation of what I would call Catholic unionists, who would vote to stay in the United Kingdom in a referendum, then also voting for pro-union political parties in Northern Ireland. And that is where I see a significant piece of work for my party, that we need to be developing our party in a way that will attract those pro-union wider Catholic voters. And because there is a significant number of Catholic unionists, but that is not being reflected when it comes to party political unionism. And we need to do a piece of work on that, and that'll take time to do that, and to have the party position ourselves in a way that will show that our policies are the right policies, and is easier for people who historically haven't voted for the DUP to be able to do that.
Of course, as we find in the United States, a lot of times, as you mentioned, this minority of unionist Catholics, a lot of times people don't always vote for the politician, even though they might regardless of their opinions on certain issues, because they have to choose the issues that matter most to them. Sinn Féin didn't even run on really having a unity referendum this last time. I want to lastly turn to something you mentioned just briefly here. You said that you're Northern Irish and you're British. In a hypothetical situation, 30 years down the line, whenever it be, if there is a vote to rejoin the Republic of Ireland and that referendum does pass, do you see yourself staying in Northern Ireland, or do you see yourself leaving for the island of Great Britain?
Oh no, this is where I've been born and bred. My family have lived on Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland for hundreds of years. So these are my neighbours, and some of them want to be part of a political union with the Republic of Ireland, and I want to have good relations with them. But if there was a constitutional change, this is my home. I would be wanting to make that work, even though I would be wanting to campaign, and I would, for a different outcome. You would have to then respect that democratic outcome. But I don't see it coming. But if you ask me, if it did happen, would I be leaving Northern Ireland? Absolutely not. I have friends from all religious persuasions and political opinions, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. And you would have to accept the democratic outcome of that election. And you would then need to see how can you best represent your constituents. But I don't see it happening.
Mr. Paul Givan, former First Minister of Northern Ireland, member of the Democratic Unionist Party, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.